Why no incidents masks infrastructure risk. In many organizations, infrastructure risk is judged by a deceptively simple metric: whether anything has gone wrong. If systems are operating, inspections are passed, and no major incidents have occurred, infrastructure is often assumed to be healthy. The absence of failure becomes evidence of resilience. Over time, no incidents hardens into a default risk signal used in dashboards, briefings, and capital deferrals. That assumption is increasingly flawed. Modern infrastructure rarely fails without warning. The more common risk is not sudden collapse, but silent degradation. Systems operating under growing stress with shrinking margin until recovery options narrow. When incidents finally occur, they often reflect years of accumulated exposure rather than an isolated event. The danger is not that leaders ignore risk, it is that they rely on indicators that no longer measure it. Incident-free does not mean low risk. Historically, incident tracking worked because infrastructure systems were simpler, loads were predictable, and operating conditions changed slowly. Failures were discrete. Wear was visible. Time allowed for course correction. Today's infrastructure operates under very different conditions. Systems are more tightly coupled, demand profiles are denser, and variability, weather, energy supply, operating cycles has increased. Infrastructure can remain functional while becoming progressively more brittle. The American Society of Civil Engineers has repeatedly warned that infrastructure systems often appear stable until they reach a tipping point, at which failure risk accelerates rapidly rather than gradually. In other words, long periods of normal operation can mask the buildup of structural stress. This creates a measurement gap. Incident-based metrics capture outcomes, not conditions. They record what has already happened, not what is becoming likely. A facility can report 0 incidents while running systems near thermal limits, relying on deferred maintenance or exhausting redundancy through routine operations. From a reporting standpoint, risk appears low. From an engineering and operational standpoint, it is rising. The normalization of degradation. One reason no incidents persists as a comfort metric is that degradation is gradual and easy to normalize. Maintenance intervals are shortened. Manual overrides become standard practice. Temporary fixes remain in place longer than intended. Load management becomes a daily negotiation rather than an exception. None of these trigger formal alarms. They become part of how work gets done. The U.S. Government Accountability Office has consistently found that deferred maintenance increases the likelihood of sudden system failure and raises long-term costs, even when facilities continue operating without immediate disruption. In effect, the absence of failure can coexist with growing exposure. Over time, organizations recalibrate their expectations. What once signaled concern becomes routine. Infrastructure risk does not disappear, it becomes embedded in operations. Why dashboards fail to capture infrastructure stress. Most infrastructure dashboards are built to show compliance and uptime, not resilience. They track availability, outages, inspection status, and regulatory adherence. These are necessary metrics, but they are incomplete. They rarely show how close systems are to their limits, how much redundancy remains, or how recovery capacity has changed. The National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine draw a clear distinction between reliability and resilience, noting that systems can operate reliably under normal conditions while remaining highly vulnerable to disruption or stress. Incident-free performance, in this context, can be misleading. In many organizations, the most important infrastructure signals live outside formal reporting. Increased reliance on operator judgment, narrower operating windows, reduced tolerance for routine variability, greater consequences from small disruptions. Leadership sees green indicators. Operators feel the strain. Lagging indicators become governance risk. Relying on incident-free performance as proof of safety creates a governance blind spot. Boards and executives make capital decisions based on reported risk. When those indicators lag reality, investment is delayed until exposure becomes visible, often through failure, regulatory scrutiny, or financial loss. Research from the National Institute of Standards and Technology on critical infrastructure highlights that tightly coupled systems are more prone to cascading failures, where small disruptions propagate rapidly across dependent systems. In these environments, waiting for an incident before acting can magnify consequences. This is how infrastructure risk migrates from operations to enterprise exposure. Not through negligence, but through delayed visibility. What early risk actually looks like. Infrastructure risk shows up long before incidents occur. It appears as proximity to limits rather than failure events. Early indicators include systems routinely operating near design capacity, loss of redundancy during normal operations, maintenance activities that require operational trade-offs, increased sensitivity to weather or supply variability, longer recovery times from minor disruptions. The International Energy Agency, IEA, has noted that operating energy and infrastructure systems close to capacity reduces operational flexibility and increases the severity and duration of disruptions when shocks occur. These are stress conditions, not incident conditions, and they are rarely captured in binary dashboards. Facilities and operations teams often recognize these signals early. The challenge is translating that recognition into decision-relevant information. Reframing risk before failure forces the issue. The most resilient organizations are not those with the fewest incidents. They are the ones that treat incident-free operation as a starting point, not a conclusion. They ask different questions. How much margin do our systems actually have? Which assumptions about reliability no longer hold? Where are we depending on informal workarounds? How quickly could small disruptions escalate? These questions shift the focus from outcomes to conditions, from what has happened to what is becoming harder to contain. The strategic implication, no incidents, is a comforting phrase. It suggests stability, control, and good management. But in modern infrastructure systems, it can also mask growing exposure. Risk does not wait for permission to become visible. It accumulates quietly inside systems that still function until they don't. The challenge for leaders is not preventing every failure. It is recognizing when incident-free performance is no longer a reliable proxy for safety. Infrastructure risk is increasingly defined by how close systems are to their limits, not by whether something has already gone wrong. Seeing that difference early is what separates managed risk from forced response. You've been listening to Sustainability Soundbites by Environment and Energy Leader. For partnership opportunities, please reach out to our team.